conversation and cutting-edge current affairs comment with the notorious B.I.G.G.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
Listen, this guy's a nightmare. He's not a great guy, folks.
I've got another confession to make.
Well, what's wrong with effing loving them that much? I really don't know. What's offensive about the Foo Fighters? How could that get you suspended from the Labour Party? People are tweeting big-time Labour purge songs. The one I've liked best so far is from Raymond Deloney, where the tweets have no name. That's absolutely brilliant. And somebody says that it wasn't Wally at Glastonbury. He must like the Foo Fighters. No, it's not Wally that was at Glastonbury. It was the Big Ugly Bear. Wally's way too slick to be at Glastonbury. Well, slick in a David Brent sort of a way. Now, the National Health Service is being murdered in plain sight by Theresa May and Jeremy Hunt and the Conservative government. And Labour is finding it difficult to do anything about it because it's, well, imploding, tearing itself apart. Jeremy Corbyn had a press conference on the NHS to launch a new policy initiative of Diane Abbott, the shadow health secretary, but it was wrecked by these low-life journalists who only wanted to talk about seats on a train. But one of the doctors who was there and who spoke at that press conference as a kind of warm-up for Jeremy Corbyn has been good enough to come on the show to talk to us about the plans that are being drawn up that could see savage cuts to NHS services across England. He's a junior doctor of 10 years, Dr. Rishi Dhir. Dr. Rishi, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, George.
Now, because no one heard a word of the press conference, because they were more concerned with the phony war over Traingate, summarise for us, if you would, what was said there.
So what was said was it was actually quite a groundbreaking day for the NHS because Mr. Corbyn was talking about renationalising the NHS. So what that means is it means scrutinising where the money in the NHS is being wasted, particularly in the form of PFI contracts, and reversing some of those contracts or making sure they are strictly adhered to. What he talked about was taking the NHS, which is being privatised, and putting it back into public hands.
Yeah, renationalising the NHS.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was quite ironic because there were 7 questions at the press conference, 4 of which were about Virgin Trains. And the footage which was shown of the so-called argument with the Sky News reporter, that was the 3rd question after one to BBC and one to ITV, both of which had been about trains. So that was the 3rd question in a row. So actually, I thought that footage was put up out of context. And secondly, Mr. Corbyn did answer the journalist's question. It was the journalist himself who was a little bit aggressive. So I felt that actually it was a little bit insulting that on the day that a massive NHS policy decision was made, with a doctor of 10 years experience there and a nurse present, that very little attention was paid to the actual underlying issue.
Well, they don't give a toss about the National Health Service. That's the truth of it. And there's a big job being done, isn't there, to make people conclude that the NHS is in such bad shape that it can't go on in its current form. That's the game that they're involved in. I hear it from right-wing people all the time. They say, well, we love the NHS, but it can't go on like this. And what they mean is it's got to change to something closer to the American model, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think that's what they're looking for. It's a 2-tiered insurance system. And I believe particularly it's not necessarily that funds are not available. I think that it's that funds are being mismanaged and wasted. And so by creating an impression of a service that's failing and by pushing a service to failure, you then make it a much more palatable option to then introduce private services. It's like, oh, well, look at this private MRI service, or look at this private service we can do, or maternity here, or so-and-so here. By shutting down A&Es, by centralising services, you then create a palatable option because you give the impression of a service that's in failure.
Well, what did Diane Abbott's new policy propose to do in detail?
So, well, I was going to say to you, in terms of the actual interviews that you were talking about, which weren't publicised, I've actually tweeted them on my own account at Dear Hunter, DHIRHUNTER. So I'm going to be spreading a lot of the interviews that were taken. I got someone to video them and
Excellent.
put some of them up.
Excellent.
Because, and I think, we've got companies like Unity March, and also with my own song, Stand Up by Dr.
We're gonna play that in just a minute.
Well, I'm using that as an opportunity to try and get the message out and reach a lot of people very quickly. But yeah, Diane Abbott was talking about giving back the nurses' bursary, which has been taken away, and that's leading to a massive brain drain of nurses from the profession. So she was talking about reinstituting the nursing bursary. They were talking, as I said before, about scrutinising PFI contracts, making sure that they're adhered to, ones that are rogue, cancelling them, and essentially a lot of the services which are being sold off and broken up, putting them back into public hands.
Well, it's a top-class policy. It's just a pity that the media conspired, that no one got to know about it. It's good that you have floated it. Just finally, before we play your song, what's the current morale, the current mood amongst your fellow junior doctors?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, George. The morale has been very bad the last few months. We've felt as a profession that we've been not only discredited, but devalued. I know a number of very good colleagues who've left the profession to go to Australia and New Zealand, which is incredibly sad, but I don't blame them because, number one, then it's becoming more and more difficult to do your job. One thing I wanted to highlight is, as an orthopedic surgeon, I'm having to cancel 3 or 4 patients every week because of lack of beds, lack of resources. That's nothing to do with strikes. That's something that happens on a week-by-week basis. We're having to stretch ourselves so thinly across 5 days, and now we're being told that actually, this amazing 7-day service on a cost-neutral envelope where they won't put any money in. And I think we've seen earlier this week that has been exposed to be a complete sham as well. So
Hunt was told by his own officials that it couldn't be done.
Exactly. And one thing I wanted to highlight as well is that he, on the basis of that policy, that 7-day policy, he has tried to push through and impose this junior doctor contract, which has brought forward the first ever complete strike in history. And yet he's not being made or taken to task for that. The Tory party is not being taken to task for that. And yet we're hearing on every single newspaper about Traingate. Now, trains might be very interested, but I, as a member of the NHS, I'm not here banging about supporting Corbyn or supporting Smith. I'm banging about supporting the NHS. Why is this not a bigger issue? Why is the issue of a 7-day service being lied upon and being used as a basis to impose this contract? Why is that not the number one issue? I really do question that.
Very, very good questions, and you've questioned it very eloquently. Dr. Rishi Dhir, thank you very much for joining us. Let's hear a bit of your song.
It is time for us to stand and fight, side by side. We can win if we unite. Generations will look back at what we do. Do we care for everyone or just a few? You may mislead them and feed them a whole web of lies, but people can see the real truth that you hide. It's not safe, not fair, but they just don't care. We did not sign up for this. It's not safe, not fair, but they just don't care. We did not sign up for this. Spreading fear, repeating lies don't make them true. It is clear, ministers don't have a clue.
Well, I better not say I effing loved it or I'll get banned out the Labour Party. Oh, wait. Foo Fighters coming up also throughout the evening in honour of Catherine Starr, the young woman who's been purged out of the Labour Party because she said on Facebook that she effing loved Foo Fighters. You couldn't make this up.